is to glorify God, serve the human, glorify God, build disciples, and serve the human need. And so, how can I do the first to do this last to do this second too? And he looked out across his community and saw that there was something missing called education. And without going into that long story, the programs that he wrote in order to serve that community became the foundations of what we know today as Head Start. My mother was a hidden figure scientist. The hidden figure scientists were African-American women primarily who were in the background doing incredible things like sending men to the moon. She was in medicine. And so she was the one in the background who was working on this ugly disease we still haven't cured called valley fever. And she was the first to find out how to grow valley fever in the laboratory. If you can't grow a disease, you can't cure a disease. Even though they still haven't cured this one, it's a fungus. And so I had that background working with me on how am I going to do the same things, encouraged to be a scientist, encouraged to be a pastor, encouraged to be learned, whatever it took. And so that's where they came from. So that would be my story of self for now. There's a lot more there, but that will give us a good foundation.
Good, thank you, George. Darren, what would you identify as experiences or events that help shape priorities and passions for you?
So my story is it's really evolves threefold. So my grandmother and my grandfather were so important, so critical to my upbringing from the standpoint of what I learned in a community that could hopefully ultimately save my life in that very same community. They grew nutritious produce, had what I didn't know as such a very young guy growing up in South Central Los Angeles off of Vermont and Jefferson. They had the first community that literally had edible alleyways and edible thoroughfares. My grandfather, from the way the story goes, left school at a very young age, third grade, and actually spoke fluent Spanish and was incredible in the community. Folks will come up to the gates and talk to him in Spanish, and other folks will come up to him and we go hunting with them with our greyhound dogs. And so my grandfather was a beautiful piece of my upbringing. My grandmother was just such an incredibly even-tempered human being that I never heard her say a cross word, and we'll get to this a little bit later, except for she told me one time, she says, you know what? She says, you got to try to love evenly. However, be careful. You got to watch out for the police. Now, she told me this as a very young guy. And as a very young guy, I got to tell you that I really didn't soak all of that in. I didn't get the full breadth of what she was saying when she said, you got to watch out for. She didn't say white policemen. She didn't say black policemen. She just said the police. I just found that to be a little unusual. Probably it was about 7 or 8 when she told me that. And then two other groups. So my grandmother had a sister that lived across the street. And my Aunt Ruth and my Uncle Jim. My Uncle Jim, because he was just a big 6'5" affable guy, he laughed very easily, man, and he always had this can of Schlitz malt liquor beer. Seemed like that can never would end. It was like a never-ending can of Schlitz malt liquor beer. However, he didn't mean any harm to anyone. That's just how Uncle Jim kind of went through life. He had that Schlitz malt liquor, and in his living room, he even had the bull. I guess he had so many of the cans of Schlitz malt liquor, they actually gave him the bull. And if we had the Schlitz malt liquor bull, it was like a porcelain bull in his living room. Uncle Jim had the greatest sense of humor. He was a fabulous cook, and his wife, my Aunt Ruth, loved Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim, when he didn't, because there were times when he didn't have the can of Schlitz malt liquor, and he worked and managed a Mark C. Bloom, which was a automotive shop. And man, she loved Uncle Jim, and they just seemed to be the happiest people on earth. And I got to tell you, that just rubbed off on me. My personality is an incredible slice of that never-ending light that they will always protrude. And then finally, the third piece in this was a gentleman by the name of Terry Ridgway. Terry Ridgway was what some people would call a gangster. What the group called the Fruittown Bloods, or before that they were known as the Gladiators. But Terry was always an interesting person, because as hard scrabble as that life was, Terry would always tell me to try to be as respectful as you can in conversation. Listen to people constantly. Now, it was interesting because he was influential and very credible in the game. Terry was shot and killed, I think, I was probably about maybe 8, 9 years old. He was probably about 14, maybe 13 or 14 years old, and he was shot and killed. However, before Terry left this earth in this container, Terry left a legacy of how he treated us young dudes. He didn't want us to grow up to be dope dealers. He didn't want us to grow up to be substance addled. Man, he would always tell us just the exact opposite. Man, try to stay away from this lifestyle. So that rubbed off on me, and that's what I do to this day. My grandmother, my grandfather, her sister, my Aunt Ruth, and my Uncle Jim, big, affable, hugging, loving Uncle Jim, and Terry Ridgway, probably the most incredible, most beautiful gangster ever who lived on the planet Earth.
Thank you both. I've heard you both talk about the influence of your grandparents on your life. Dr. Brooks, you do a whole workshop on what your grandmother taught you and how we need to go back and practice some of those things that earlier generation, maybe the greatest generation, they've been called, taught us. And that's certainly true of my own life as well. I remember on my grandmother's farm, it was just a place to be as free as I possibly could. And I remember the day when she came to me and handed me a hoe and said, Doug, I think it's time for you to make yourself useful around here. And I found out both the joy and how hard farm work, gardening is. Hot in the summer and cold in the winter, and this was in Idaho where it was quite cold. But could you say a little bit more about grandparents' influence? And I'm wondering, especially today, when there are so many fewer people that are exposed to the farm, how we learn what we all learned from our grandparents if we don't have those grandparents and those farmers available to us.
I went first last time, so I think I will yield to Darren first this time.
Excellent, excellent. You know, he's been doing that since we were young kids together. And somehow, man, I let him get away with all of that stuff, man, because he's such a great guy. But yeah, Dr. Brooks, most definitely. My grandfather, aside from coming to Los Angeles, California from Texas with pretty much the shirt on his back, they packed their car up with their belongings. They moved to a house in 1945 Los Angeles. I always like to say that they were the original Beverly Hillbillies. I mean, they came in and they just had these dreams. My grandfather was a Negro League baseball player. My grandmother was the 25th kid of a breeder slave, is what they were called back then, that was given the name, he was a full-blood Cherokee, given the name Henry Watson. And so when you look at who what they had to transcend from, the place that they had to come from, my grandparents did subtle things such as we had an avocado tree, a peach tree, we had a plum tree as soon as you walked out of the back door. We had mustards, turnips, collards, carrots. So you never socioeconomically ever associated yourself with being poor. That is some terminology that I even learned later on down in life. my pants would get a hole in them, and my grandmother would patch them. They had these iron-on patches, and she would iron on. I'd go down to Thrifty's, get a patch. She'd iron them on, and I'd go to school. The kids would kind of tease me because Jethro Bodine didn't have nothing on me. I mean, I had the whole boots and the whole ironed-on, patched-up clothes, and if my pants split, they just sew them up. And then the next day at PE, they'd split again, and they just sew them back up. And that's just the way that we live. But what you learn from that is how to, I think, proceed on a bended knee that is necessary with all the incredible depths that you're going to go through in life. You're going to have those ascensions and those beautiful mountainous moments, but you're going to have those valleys and those depths that depths of despair, depths of wow, man, I had it and I just missed getting exactly what I wanted. I mean, I felt the exactness of where I was going to be, and it somehow eluded me. So you learn that these types of things that elude you, these types of things that sometimes you feel you want, that you may not get, you learn that it's just all a part of an even keel. It's all a part of a grand flow, and that flow just doesn't yield to you, but you are incredibly blessed because you are having another day to be part of this conversation, to be part of discussions, to be part of being a blessing. And so I defer to them. They were incredible from that in those life lessons.
Darren, I remember hearing a story that you told about you're 25 years old, you're in prison, and you get the news about your grandfather. Could you tell us a little bit about that? You called it an aha moment for you in your life.
Yeah, I'm learning all these really cool cliche terminologies like aha moment. That was Doug. Quick story. When I was probably second, third grade, the teacher told us that your life expectancy in your neighborhood is 25 years of age as a young black man. So you all better pay attention because you don't even really have long for this earth. 25 years old. And so I did pay attention that day because at the tender age of about 8 or so, you're just not really thinking too much about 25. However, I personally thought it was a long way to go. So I went down and I got on bended knee that night and I prayed to live to be 26 years old. I figured if I could just squeeze one more year beyond that, because 25 seemed like a long time to me. Didn't really have too much to compare that to. But however, I got to tell you, just from what I saw in my community and what I saw as a next generation of gang banging, the next generation of hardcore illicit drug use, I went back on that bended knee the next night, and I said, if I can cross that out, I know I asked to live to be 26 years old. However, I do understand that is being gluttonous. That's asking for too much. So I said, if you give me 25 years old on bended knee, if you give me 25 years old, I'll take it. I'll take it. And at 25 years old, I was in maximum security. Basically, death for a young black man in my community is not only the 6 feet under, but it's also long-term incarceration because you lost your life on the planet Earth. Within this container, that's all a death within itself. So as I sat behind bars at the age of 25, I went, okay, they're going to release me in the name of justice. They don't have enough to kind of keep me even longer than they want to keep me in the cell. So I thought about that prayer. I'm 25 years old. However, I didn't know that this happened. That same inspiration to me, because I was so out of touch, that same inspiration to me, my grandfather, he passed away on my 25th birthday. Dang, I mean, Is this a serendipitous moment? Is it a cruel moment? Is this a moment that's going to send me further into the depths of a darkness that I felt was much better than trying to conform to the reality of what this world is? I don't know. However, I did know that I had made that promise that I would try to be and do the very best, Doug, that I possibly can in my life if I could just get to that 25 years of age. They released me 25 at the age of 25. I'm now 55 years old, and I've enjoyed 35 years of at least a progression in trying to be a better person. And so, yes, that was an incredible moment for me. And once again, that grandfather, man, that passed on my 25th, literally passed on my 25th birthday, it is part of who's speaking with you right now. That's part of that positivity and that incredible energy that people know as God, that people know as such grace, that always shines. It's my better piece. It's my better half.
Thank you, Darren. Dr. Brooks, you put in the chat a little bit about, or a link, a YouTube link to My Grandmother Was Green, so people can go and look at that afterwards. But whet our appetite for that. What did your grandmother teach you?
Well, I live in South Phoenix. I've always lived in South Phoenix for most of my life, not all of it. I moved on occasion to try to get closer to school or something like that. And it is said that here in South Phoenix, we're all but a grandmother away from farming. My grandmother had a farm at about 20th Street and Broadway. Now it's a big warehouse of some kind, okay. But that's where her farm was. That's where I spent a lot of time when I was a child. And one thing I saw Grandma doing that I didn't really understand how green, how contemporary it was. You see, she didn't do these things just out of the need to be green, try to save the world. She did these things because it was the best way for her family to survive. First, Grandpa Barnes was a Pullman porter. That's a famous name in Black history. That's what they looked that up as far as who they were. And my grandmother was a housewife, but they leveraged their resources to put all their kids through college. Grandma, the way that she ran her home, which didn't need air conditioning, was the strangest thing. I can't quite figure it out now. Maybe it's gotten a whole lot hotter here than it was before. But she recycled everything. These pop bottles, we would go to the store full of Barks root beer. I'm sure that Darren remembers the Barks root beer. And we would get a dime or something for these pop bottles. And she said, they'll make me as a child a little bit of money. Grandma would take the gray water. We now call it gray water. The water from her washing machine, water from her sink, and they would water her garden out in front of the house. She had this box full of buttons, which just fascinated me as a child. All of these things, and I can go on and on about this, but all these things we now call being green. But they, again, were just the best way of managing her home and doing the best for her husband and her children, 3 of them. Today, it happens. Today we call this being sustainable. But it gave me an idea that maybe we were doing the whole sustainability thing wrong, kind of doing it backwards. We were looking at people and say, you need to do this. And people were rejecting that. They were fighting that. You're not going to, we're Americans. I'm not going to tell you to do anything. I guess we've heard a lot of that recently. But instead, here are some things that help you directly, and you can apply on all kinds of things in your home. And if you just happen to do them, like putting a CFL light bulb instead of an old-fashioned one, you not only help your family because you save yourself a lot of money, but also you help the world at the same time. So it was from what grandma did and what I learned from that I got this basic philosophy of applying sustainability as a value, as something that you do so that you can be better yourself, but also that simultaneously help others. But that's a whole long story we can go into later. But that kind of gives the background of grandma and grandpa and my mother.
Thank you, George. So one of the things we considered doing is calling this call Gardening While Black. But we decided that that's a meme that we hear, you know, driving while black, shopping while black. But it does raise an issue that I really want to hear both of you address. And that is, what does gardening and farming have to do with racism these days? We hear that in 1920, 14% of the farmers were Black farmers, and now it's less than 2%. So how can gardening and farming help us address the issue of racism today?
Who goes first?
George, why don't you?
Go ahead, Darren.
Okay, yeah, I'll tackle that.
Good.
So, Doug, what was that initial title? Was it Gardening While Black?
Right.
So there's George got a big smile. He's loving just waiting on my reply for this. However, you know, in all due respect, I typically will err on the side of a certain type of, I would have to say, maturation in my life. And in that maturation, well, there's something that I've learned, and that is my emphatic nature that can arise from conversations like this sometimes has to yield to, I think, the better side of how we need to understand these conversations from a humanistic perspective. Meaning, there's a book by Leah Penniman called Farming While Black. Leah Penniman is fantastic in the way that she brings a community concept together while farming while black. Now, I'm going to give you guys a tidbit of something that's probably going to be incredibly controversial to you. And where I come from, I might refer to someone as my nigga. That's my nigga. That's my nigga. Man, if he don't get no bigger, that's my nigga. Right? Now, don't get this twisted. You can't say the same thing, Doug, because I've taken power in my sense from that word that might have been derogatory, such as nigger, right? So therefore, in this conversation, it typically might not even be relevant. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because there is a definitive cultural challenge that we all face as human beings that you may not necessarily understand in that dark alleyway that I have come through. That dark alleyway is has its own lingo. It has its own piece of fairness, and it definitely has its own piece of darkness, like any other place. It's a microcosm of our world. So I farm with an intergenerational, multi-ethnic, asset-based community development model that will allow beautiful human beings who want to build community together to do just that. Now, with that being said, my intersection, right, of where I'm going to meet you, where you come from, is exactly where we build community at the Garden of Tomorrow, at Spaces of Opportunity. This is the beauty of actually this conversation for me, and why I would have, I just wanted to be a part of this. These are the types of conversations that actually allow me to not necessarily assimilate, right? But somehow I can actually just be me, which I think is an intelligent, reasoning, even-handed person who could be part of an incredible conversation if given the opportunity. Asset-based community development means that just like good old Dr. Brooks, who's fantastic, Darren Chapman, man, is basically a PhD in his own world. I don't have the certification. However, I become a doctorate in how I communicate from a perspective. And so I appreciate being part of this conversation and all of a part of this whole initiative of what we're talking about today.
I guess, if I'm on now, you asked the question, how does gardening, Doug, will you restate the question, please? Just.
Yeah, what does gardening have to do, and how can it help us address racism that's so endemic in our culture today?
Okay, part of the challenge of racism is the refusal to grant access to so many basic things. And it's been going on systemically now for hundreds of years. You know, after slavery, we essentially never left slavery till 1960 something, because they just turned the laws into something pablum that kind of hid what was actually slavery behind the laws, and the old Jim Crow laws and things such as that never let us free, really. And even up until the signing of the Civil Rights issue, and now the same issues are now coming up again, just kind of under the surface. And that last year, with all the Black Lives Matter, just brought it out. You know, that it's always been there, you know. But gardening itself, you know, the first person who literally and in writing documented, applied sustainability, gardening, food to racism and how to beat it was George Washington Carver, in my book, because he's the first one that I really understood that did this. It was one of those old racist laws and tropes from the early 1900s, where you have people who are literally living under they call them sharecroppers, and they didn't own their land, but they got to stay in their land because they farmed a crop that the landowner demanded to have. If you lost your crop, you lost your home. And they were indeed losing their homes at that time because they were farming an unsustainable crop, which was cotton. Cotton, without going into a lot of scientific gobbledygook, literally sucks all of the life out of the land. So he replaced the cotton with a sustainable crop that put life back into the land, which in this case were sweet potatoes or soybeans or others, that put nitrogen back in the land, put fertility back into the soil, so that you could farm sustainably. The land would not lose resources and become useless after a time. You know, okay, they would put the resources back into the soil. But that was not all that he did. But this allowed them to have a crop that would satisfy the needs of the landowners. But there was more. Okay, it was not. And so he used his knowledge of botany, of science, of the world, to give them this crop. And the crop gave, so that's the environmental portion. People are profit and planet. Okay, so that's the planet portion of it. Then came the profit planet part of it, that he gave people a new resource. Okay, but then the social part of it is of course that because they now had money, they could go out and have a better life. You know, give the kids something they couldn't have before. But that wasn't where he stopped. He not only gave them the crop itself, but then he developed hundreds of other products to be made from those crops, which gave the farmers an additional source of economic resource. Okay, so he did the whole people, profit, and planet thing for the purpose of defeating the situation that they were in, which was caused by racism, 100 years before anyone ever brought up the word at ASU. So that's not a dig at ASU at all, but the whole sustainability thing, I wish that they would teach about what Carver did, and not only what some of the other sustainable leaders did over time. So now today, okay, we have the issue that many of us, we left the farm. We don't want to go back. That's what I've often been told. We left the plantation a long time ago. But now people have returned to wanting to grow again. Back in World War II, we had the victory gardens, and people grew about 800 pounds of food on average for that effort. And people are talking about today, we want to do victory gardens again. Well, you can't. Not because of some law, I guess, and you just don't have the 1,200 feet of land to grow 800 pounds of food. So my focus today, looking at the same issues that Carver did, how can we restore the ability to grow a significant amount of healthy food in our backyards that are postage stamps compared to what they used to be? And so that's been kind of my focus, and I've actually done that, playing some wonderful science games, but recently demonstrated that you can grow 1,000 pounds of food in 400 square feet, which is the size of a garden in a modern day backyard here in Phoenix. So yes, it can be done. And then if you can lower the cost of access, that's another thing that often is inherent in institutional racism. It's too expensive. You can't do it. You don't have enough money to get into it. So if you can make this as cheap as possible, then more people will have access. More people can have food security in our food deserts and more. And then if you do it in your backyard, I got nothing against community gardens, but if you do it in your backyard, it brings a direct resource into your home economics to help sustain that home on land that you own. So that is the way that I have been addressing the issue. I'm just one person, but it's a way that I think has so many possibilities. The last thing that I will say is that last year I had the pleasure of working on a grant I had always wanted to work on. It just came out of nowhere in Florida. Someone in Florida found me, and amen, and we got a chance to work on it. And that is the grant with the nation right now needs fish, believe it or not. We eat 1 pound, every 10 pounds of fish we eat, we only grow 1 pound of it. And the effort was to try to bring more minority farmers into fish farming, which is a very lucrative thing if you can afford to get into it. Okay, if you can get into it. And so my job essentially was to figure out how to do this. I was the subject matter expert. How do we do this? What are the issues stopping it? And we ran against all the things we were just talking about before. No one can afford 1,000 acres of land. No one can afford the thousands of dollars even to do an inner city high-tech farming operation. So how do we change all of these paradigms so that people in the inner city, people that have always wanted to do this with, can have access to these new farming technologies and also the sustainability and the profitability that they offer. And I did, it was a great project, but I was glad to see it. And that goes back into what I'm talking about, how to do this in our backyards, and that we have actually figured out. It's just a matter of implementing what we have thought of doing.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Nikki is on the call this time, but in a couple of weeks, she'll be leading a workshop on gardening and climate change. The mission for both of us as organizations is to address issues of climate justice, climate chaos. But while we've got both of you with us today, and to give you, any of you who have questions or comments you want to make, go ahead and do those in the chat now, and we'll address those, as many as we can. But do either of you have anything to say about gardening and climate change? Darren, would you go first?
Sure. So yes, when and Dr. Brooks put it very well, that whether it's a community garden or whether you're gardening in your backyard, you're creating a resource. Obviously, if you're eating 10 pounds of fish for every 1 pound of fish that is grown, then we constantly do these types of things to our world where we deplete the resources. So for me, having a 1.5 acre project, a 20-acre project, or working with multiple others to create edible landscaping, to create more community gardens. We're looking at not only a climate action change initiative, but we're looking at a holistic built environment concept. And so gardening for me has become a way of changing a narrative that unfortunately has been way too prevalent in our community. We have some of the hottest places on planet Earth in these densely populated, overdeveloped, just communities. It's brick and mortar to death, and I mean literally to death. It's people are dying of heat exhaustion, heat stroke. It's so environmentally we look to pair ourselves with folks like a Nature Conservancy, or folks like a Audubon Society, or Nina Mason Pulliam. Some of these different folks who have been working in avenues in regards to our environment. When you tackle your environment from a community garden perspective, and you take that thought process, you know, this April, Tiger Mountain Foundation will be going into its 15th year, but in those 15 years, what we've learned is how to put in cooler canopies of trees, and edible landscaping, and edible trees, and so yes, it's crucial that that as we got to this better, stronger level of understanding what just a community garden could actually do, we actually are able to dive our youth, our adults, and our seniors into conversations around stronger environment. Mentally, you are doing a better thing for your community. However, you are also keeping your community cooler. However, you are also utilizing better water efficiencies. So environmentally, you are becoming smarter. And it's just crucial that as you get to a level, your responsibility actually is to become even stronger around some of the different ways you create better environment.
Thank you. Dr. Brooks?
I have been blessed, I suppose, lucky, I don't know. But people keep asking me to do things. For example, Doug, you mentioned the Gila River Indian community, the Acoma Autumn. I was their environmental coordinator for 10 years, and helped to build the new irrigation system out there. So I know them well, as I do the other folks, their cousins over on the east side, the Salt River people. It's an interesting project, but back in 2014, I got asked to be part of the team to write the new City of Phoenix general plan. Most people don't know it, but every city in Arizona must have a business plan that was written every 10 years and voted on by the people. And I was asked to be on this. You know, the mayor knew my family, and so they knew of me, so I was asked to be part of it. And I got to work with the current mayor of Phoenix. She was also on this committee. But this plan somehow became very sustainable. The entire plan was based upon the concept of people, profit, and planet, which I put a link to it into the chat. You can download it. And this was, and we use different words for political reasons, but that's what it was based on. And there was a huge component in it on farming. In fact, in every iteration, I made sure that 2 words were in there, and that was urban agriculture, but community gardens and everything else, food landscaping. I don't know if we have food deserts in there or not, but there definitely are now paying attention to. So when the document went up to vote, it was approved by 76% vote of the people. And that made literally everyone, when they voted for it, they voted on the city of Phoenix to go green and to put in all of these landscaping things that we're referring to that will reduce the heat island effects, that will reduce, that will absorb carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, that would encourage urban agriculture, because Phoenix is 43% empty space. If we can use these locations and turn them into community gardens, such as over here at Spaces of Opportunity, which is 30 acres. But then it's gone even further now, because the city is so deeply into this. They've written food plans for South Phoenix. In fact, Darren is in one of those food plans, and your picture is very prominently displayed in the South Phoenix food plan that was written for South Phoenix, so people could know how to farm. And now they're working on ways, how can we hold locations like Spaces of Opportunity, because it's worth multi-millions of dollars. And so we have this thing in real estate called highest and best use, that says you want your real estate to get loans on it, you have to show you are using the land for its best purpose. And farming might not be defined by some people as the best purpose. And so how can we hold on to these spaces and do so much for us environmentally, and do so much for us socially, and do so much for us economically, and but in different ways than just building another house? And so I've been lucky, to be involved in these things. But the last thing I will say is that I'm going on about the city of Phoenix, but it is such a huge opportunity that so few people know about. The general plan actually says to do this. It means that, well, if you can't do something unless your city says you can. Everything we do is a compromise. And if folks don't want you to have a garden in your front yard, they won't let you have a garden in your front yard. But we wrote a document that would allow that, okay? That would encourage everyone, like Darren Chapman, who's done wonderful things with the opportunity to produce these farms and these green areas, tree spaces, and also find ways to conserve water, because we are in a drought right now. We've been in this drought since 1993. That they say later, but it's 1993. And it's going to continue for a while. And so find a way to combine all of these things so that we can reduce this heat island effect. 118 degrees this summer for a week. It was 90 degrees this week, in the middle of October, of November. That's ridiculous. Okay, there's something happening here that is quite real and that we need to address, or as that book called Bird on Fire did say, and I'm borrowing Darren, you're in that book too, okay? But as that book did say, this place was going to be unlivable in 30 years. So we have to turn this switch now, to turn this stuff off, and there are ways for us to accomplish the task, if we are willing to, that will preserve the economy that Phoenix has. We don't have to discard the economy and shiver in the dark, as some people used to say. No, we now have the science that will enable us to do that, while simultaneously doing everything else, if we have the will to do it, which means we have to change what we do. We can't just do things the old way and expect a different sustainable result. I'm sorry, I'm starting to sound like my father here and preach a little bit. But this stuff does resonate with me strongly. Yeah. So I put the plans, the document to link to Plan Phoenix in the chat. I encourage anyone to please download it and look and see what this city is actually doing, and then follow up on these things, because it's quite impressive. And I'm very happy with Phoenix to want to do it. I'm very happy with the leadership and the mayor who has continued to make this real.
One of our participants is Hazel Chandler, and she's put a comment about what she's doing on her patio, 10 by 18, but she's also been working with Mayor on the emergency plan on climate. So Hazel, I wonder if you would say something about both those.
I was just putting a comment in about the heat issue. One of the things that City of Phoenix is doing right now is they've committed to, by 2025, to have a 25% tree cover over the entire area of Phoenix. And they have done some extensive look into what areas of the city are the hottest with ASU, and are now focusing on building that tree canopy in those areas that have been deemed the hottest. They actually overlapped a map of the hottest areas versus where people, you know, are out walking and so on, like to transportation and so on. And so that's where they're targeting. There is a revised plan that is up for comments right now. I can put the link to that in the chat. I really encourage you to read it and make comments. The comments are due by December 31st.
Thank you, Hazel. Ellie, have you noticed other comments that, let me see, Nona has a couple comments. Which one is most pressing for you, Nona? Comment or question for you?
Doug, after her, there's a question in the chat I really would like to address. So,
okay.
But after her, Nona.
That's
Good.
okay, Dr. Brooks. Go ahead. I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
Oh, okay. Well, no. Well, this is kind of a focused question. So I thought anyway. In the chat, it asked the question: what about the health concerns around eating farm fish that are heavily treated with antibiotics? It's a myth. Okay. Fish farmed in the United States really doesn't do that, because not only is it bad, you know, using antibiotics as a prophylactic causes resistance and bacteria, and then just the people themselves, our customers, wouldn't like it, and so it is not something that is encouraged. And so we are trying to find more sustainable methods in order to reduce the level of any diseases. And there are, whenever you have a lot of food concentrated in one location, you have the potential for a lot of disease. And so at least the aquaculture industry is trying to find better ways of accomplishing the task. So I just wanted to answer that question for you. Now, coming in from overseas is a whole nother matter, but they have to serve our market, and if they don't meet our criteria, their product might not get in, even though we actually only have the opportunity to check about 5% of the food that's coming in, because there's no money to check it with. Hopefully that did answer that question.
Thank you, that is helpful. Nona?
So yes, Nona, please.
I was going to ask Dr. Brooks also if the local market has been receptive to locally farmed fish. Is it hard to find places to sell it, or has that not been an issue? Or
well, allow me to, and I'll be very, very brief. Okay, locally farmed food, okay, is one of the greatest things in the world. Darren knows this, and food is hard to sell. I mean, it's no simple thing to go out to that farmer's market and get that food sold. You know, particularly when we have to compete with the major growers. You know, like in Yuma, as an example, where they grow most of the lettuce in half the lettuce in the United States. They can send something in here for 25 cents. It's hard for us to even put a hole in the ground for 25 cents. So, but speaking specifically of fish. There are no locally grown fish. Arizona really can't support fish farms very well. The nearest fish farm is of any size is 120 miles from here, in a little place called Hyder, Arizona, that sits on a perched water table on the Gila River. They have geothermal water, and there's one fish farm there that it does about 3 million pounds of fish a year. But compared to the amount of fish that Phoenix by itself eats, that's nothing. Okay, we eat 16 pounds of fish a person times 4 million people, so 3 million pounds a year does not add up to much. Now, recently we've been able to do something that has not been had the ability to do. That is the democratization of fish farming, and that is a new technology called aquaponics that's basically allowed us to put many fish farms in everyone's backyard if they want it. That with a little modification that we've done now would enable a family to actually grow the amount of fish that they can actually eat in a year. Now, mind you, you don't have the diversity of product. You can't grow a tuna in your backyard, but it is a start. But then for every 10 pounds of fish you grow, you also grow for every 10 pounds of fish, you grow 100 pounds of vegetables. So that allows for highly nutritious vegetables because there's no antibiotics, no fertilizer. Well, there's fertilizers, but they came from the fish mostly. So that gives you another opportunity for marketing, but also now that we've done one last thing, new technology has allowed us to grow these things, both the fish and the produce, for about 80 cents a pound, not including labor, because backyard gardeners don't include labor, but 80 cents a pound. That means it's cheaper to grow it in your backyard than going and getting it from the store. Penny saved is a penny earned. So therefore, if you are comparing your prices to the price in the supermarket as opposed to your backyard, every time you go to the backyard, that's money you're actually making, since you are not spending it elsewhere. And that's a new business model that has not been available in the United States, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. And also, I'm glad the city of Phoenix has gotten interested in that as well.
Thank you.
Can I also ask a question of Darren?
Yeah.
A minute. I just wanted to ask Darren, I was always so impressed by that, the program of creating community for people coming out of prison. And I'm really curious how long people are staying engaged with the program as time goes on. I know you've been doing it a long time now. How is that community evolving in your experience?
It's interesting, and one of the reasons, Nona, good question. One of the reasons why we choose asset-based community development is because depending on the individual, they may be with us for 8 to 12 weeks, and they were so ready to actually launch. And we recognize that they have the punctuality. We recognize that the responsibility is there. And they've also put out other applications to maybe make that next step in a workforce development move and or a career move. We obviously will prefer folks to be working within their passion, and if that passion was also their career, that would be fantastic. So we've seen a wide array. Most recently, we had a young lady who just did 15 years, was released from Perryville. She quickly sprung up within 16 weeks to her next level opportunity and position. She regained her youngest son and her grandson back into her life, and she's doing great things in the world of agribusiness. She started, matter of fact, I met her at a TEDx talk in Perryville. And so she built a garden in Perryville, and we were right back and forth, and apparently I wasn't writing fast enough, so she'd show me that by writing another letter real quick just to embarrass me so that I have to write her back quickly. She was just so in tune and wanting to be a part of a next conversation. She is not so much of an exception, because also what we're seeing, Nona, is probably 85% around that range of people who are not going into jails in the first place. So a lot of our youth who are coming through our point of entry, which is called our personal strategy roadmap, are not going into the jails in the first place, which we love. And then folks who are returning are not recidivating within that 6-month to 2-month period, which is considered recidivism. They're not recidivating. Although that still means that a humbling, very, very humbling 15 to 20% will recidivate. So it's beyond humbling work. But yes, these are some of the different things that we. For instance, I had a guy who came 2 years ago. He was shot 3 times by the Mesa Police Department, unarmed, by the way. If you look up the Akbar Aziz shooting, it's one of the saddest things you'll ever see in your life. However, he's been with us for 2 years. He could be. I've had another gentleman who's been with us after being released. He's been with us now for 9 years. So it just depends on the person. Some folks consider this as part of their next great move, and they're comfortable. Others were looking for something very different.
Thank you. My plan is to go maybe another 10 minutes, so we want to make sure that we give Nikki enough time to talk about the next workshop. But Darren, one of the things you've talked about often is being an asset-based organization. So I've been thinking a lot about that and how often I think about what we lack. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough talent. I don't have enough intelligence to do it. But the idea of being an asset-based organization, it makes me think of, when God calls Moses to go liberate the people, he makes all these excuses about why he can't do it. And then God says, "What's that in your hand?" And Moses says, "Well, it's a staff." Well, you can do all kinds of things with a staff. So what's in your hand is sort of the orientation and way of thinking about asset base. Could you say a little bit about that? What's in your hand?
Yeah. So what we've realized is that typically what we see in a marginalized, quote unquote, marginalized community is folks who are disconnected and or absolutely disengaged from conversations that deal with next step progress in the community that has ravaged them. So if you're not a part of that conversation, how do we somehow accomplish all of the different markers that we need to accomplish so that that person with that learning disability, that person that was given to the school district and then spit into the penal system, the penal system, which by the way is $1 billion prison pipeline, somehow with the asset aspect of what we do, not somehow, with the asset aspect that we do, basically that person with that behavioral health issue is being put back into a family, being put back into a familial setting so that we can address some of his deficit, because maybe now I'm going to be on one of those boards. And maybe now that attorney or that doctor or someone like a great Dr. Brooks is going to bring education to these conversations. They become part of that mentoring base. As I listen to Dr. Brooks and the different stories about George Washington Carver, it never ceases to give me more knowledge, which I bring back into our garden thoroughfares. And so now we become conduits to that will. We become a reciprocal piece of that will, and a virtuous cycle. Virtuous in the sense that it is always bringing virtuosity to that reciprocity, and that is the equality of asset-based community development. You can't get left behind, because if I'm doing that, then somehow my spoke, my aspect of it is not carrying the equal part of that will. It has to be a virtuous cycle. That young man that comes in that typically is looking to us because he has nothing to do, typically on a weekend, he's 21 years old, and he just doesn't fit with the 9 to 5. He hasn't assimilated enough and or fits with other aspects of our quote unquote norms of our society. So he has placement. And other teachers who get that, they have placement. They become great mentors as part of his point of entry. And they can actually be a fantastic, not trainer, not programmatic aspect, but a friend, a mentor, and an instructor on his journey.
Thank you.
I really can't say much else about ABCD. I learned that essentially from Darren's family, and I thank you very much.
Yeah.
But I did put a link to an organization that specializes in this so that you can read more about it into the chat.
Good. Are there things, either Darren or Dr. Brooks, that I didn't ask you, or that you're really chomping at the bit to say in closing words before Nikki talks about next workshop?
Yes, there is one. Agriculture, the ability to eat, everyone must eat. The ability to have clean, healthy food is critical for so many communities. It's critical for every aspect, how we grow food, using too much water, using too many fertilizers, creating too many greenhouse gases. This is creating dead zones in the ocean around every river are huge problems, and we have to figure out how to fix these if we are going to continue to feed the planet while continuing to live on the planet. Okay, because the process of feeding people is killing the people who we're trying to feed. So we need to fix that somehow. There is a new thing called agriculture technology. In fact, Phoenix is now going into ag tech and building an ag tech facility on the 7th Avenue and the river bottom. There's going to be one there with a food hub and a variety of other things. But I work in ag tech, and those of us who do work here are trying to find better ways of feeding people that doesn't do the damage that we used to do. I went down 16th Street. Darren, you go down 16th Street yesterday about 10 o'clock? There was the line of cars down the street, 16th Street and Vineyard, hundreds of cars lining up to buy to get free turkeys. I've never seen that in Phoenix before. In years before, many of those people would have said, I can buy a turkey. I can leave the other turkeys for others who really need it. Now they found out that they need it. Okay, there is a food shortage in the United States that people are not talking about, but it's showing up. NPR did a big thing on it. They had 600,000 pounds given away in Dallas the other day. Okay, so these are the issues with food, but this is also an opportunity to change how we produce food so it doesn't produce the climate change things. The last thing that I would say, since my specialty is fish, there's a lot of mythology about fish. A lot of people say, well, I want wild caught over farm raised because farm raised will kill you. It's a myth. But the worst part about the myth is that because of ocean fishing, the ocean topped out in about 1990. You can't get any more fish out of it. Like we said, and I can send you the links, okay? The ocean topped out in about 1990 into what's called a sustainable catch. You can't catch any more fish out of it. If you catch more fish, then you'll hurt the fish populations and they will decline. So the only place for all the fish that we need for the next 8 billion people, the next 8 billion people are going to show up, is going to come from fish farming. In fact, right now, we already produce half the fish in the world. So if we don't produce fish sustainably, either sustainable fisheries or in aquaculture sustainably, and doesn't have the whole environmental issues, we're going to be in big trouble. And so that is a major focus today of science, of how do we give people the fish that they want to eat. And we're not talking 10 pounds here, we're talking hundreds of millions of pounds of fish, that's the real numbers, in a way that we don't destroy the earth at the same time. And it's going to be an interesting road, but I think that we will succeed.
Darren, any final words for us as we close?
Yeah, sure. Just there's a bus. There's a bus at a church that I was introduced to by Miss Ellie Hutchinson, and that bus, on the side of it says, "Let's be better humans." Let's be better humans. Now, I farm from a concept, and I garden from a concept that builds community together. When we are community building through community gardening together. So I only say that because in its simplicity, with all of the pandemic, with all of the systemic, with all of the politicizing and the polarizing, for God's sakes, man, let's be better humans. let's build a better community together, because if we're not simply doing that, then we're falling short of one of the most simplistic ways of actually doing greater things together. I can bear arms against you. That's not a problem. However, I would prefer to build something, man, that you could absolutely enjoy for your life and the next generation. Let's build better together. Let's be better humans.
Thank you so much. I just said amen. Thank you both for helping us be better humans. Nikki, say a little bit about Nick in 2 weeks.
Sure. Hopefully, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm coming through from my phone and the computer at the same time, so it's always a little strange. But thank you so much, George and Darren, for coming to this webinar today. Wonderful, wonderful words. I've been following your work since I was at the Cooperative Extension, so it's I was really happy to hear that Doug had heard of you guys and that we could pull this together. Thank you so, so much for being here. I'm so inspired by what you're talking about. In 2 weeks, we're going to have the second part of this series. It's gardening in a time of climate change. I put in the chat the link, and let me see if I can do that again. No, okay, well, let me try again in a little bit. It's also December 6th, Sunday, 4 p.m. We have a couple different speakers. We have the National Phenology Network is coming to talk, and the Arizona Master Naturalist Group. We're going to talk about the native plant side of gardening. And then we're also going to talk about how those observations that that ordinary people make, citizen scientists we call them, contribute to all the data that we have about climate change and how vital that is, having boots on the ground, just people who watch things change and who watch things happen in their backyards and in their own gardens, and how vital that is. We're also going to have Nona from Arizona Interfaith Power and Light come and talk about the spiritual connection. Oh, thank you. The spiritual answer to climate change. We're also going to have National Wildlife Federation has a program called Sacred Grounds, and they're specifically looking at the faith-based community with climate change and encouraging people to have backyard gardens to be stewards of God's creation. So they will also be talking at the webinar in 2 weeks, and then I'll be making sure that people know how to certify their gardens through the National Wildlife Federation, and whether those gardens are edible gardens, native gardens, hopefully a mix of both, so that we address both the food issues for us humans and also the wildlife as well. So we're bettering the planet and building better humans at the same time. So thank you again. Hope to see you guys there. Yeah.
Thank you all. Let's give however we want to express our gratitudes to Dr. Brooks and Darren. Yes. Blessings on you all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Doug.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Everyone.
Dr. Brooks, have a great weekend, sir.
You as well, my friend. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.